The rain fell in sheets that night, turning the world into a blur of gray. Jackson never expected to find a child huddled beneath the bus shelter, soaked to the bone and trembling. He never expected that taking her home would change everything. And he certainly never expected what Elizabeth would do when she discovered the truth. If you're touched by this story of unexpected kindness and the ripple effects it creates, please hit that like button and subscribe to see more stories that remind us of our shared humanity. Sara's small fingers clutched Jackson's hand as they approached the front door of his modest suburban home. The 7-year-old hadn't spoken more than a few words since he'd found her 3 hours ago, wandering alone near the highway. "My name is Sara," she had whispered when he gently asked who she was. "I'm lost." Jackson's heart hammered against his ribs as he turned his key in the lock. Elizabeth would be inside, probably worried sick about where he'd been. They'd been married 15 years, but the last 3 had been strained at best. The arguments, the silences, the separate bedrooms. How would she react to a stranger's child on their doorstep at midnight? The door swung open, revealing Elizabeth in her faded blue robe, her reading glasses perched on her nose, a book forgotten in her hand. Her eyes widened first at Jackson, then dropped to the small figure beside him. "I found her at the bus stop on Maple," Jackson explained quickly. "She's lost. I called the police, but with the flooding downtown, they're overwhelmed. They asked if we could keep her safe until morning when they can send someone." Elizabeth stood frozen, her face unreadable. Jackson braced himself for the argument, for the cold dismissal, for the reminder that their marriage was hanging by a thread and this wasn't their problem. Instead, Elizabeth knelt down, her eyes level with Sara's. "You must be freezing, sweetheart," she said softly. "Let's get you into some dry clothes and make some hot chocolate. Would you like that?" The transformation in Elizabeth's face stunned Jackson. The hardness that had settled there over years of disappointment and grief melted away as she gently led Sara toward the bathroom. "I think I still have some of Lily's old pajamas in the storage closet," she called over her shoulder. Jackson stood rooted to the spot, a lump forming in his throat at the mention of their daughter's name. Lily. They hadn't spoken her name aloud in almost 2 years. While Elizabeth helped Sara change, Jackson moved through the kitchen in a daze, heating milk for hot chocolate. His mind raced with questions. Who was this child? Where were her parents? And what had happened to Elizabeth, who had barely spoken 10 words to him in the last month? An hour later, Sara was asleep in their guest room, wrapped in blankets and clutching a stuffed bear that had once belonged to Lily. Elizabeth sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea, her eyes distant. "Thank you," Jackson said quietly, breaking the silence between them. "For being so kind to her." Elizabeth looked up, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "She reminds me of Lily," she whispered. "The way she scrunches her nose when she laughs." Jackson nodded, unable to speak. Their daughter had been gone for 3 years now. Cancer. The words still felt like a knife between his ribs. Lily had been 8 when they lost her, just a year older than Sara appeared to be. "I've been so angry," Elizabeth continued, her voice barely audible. "At the world. At God. At you for being able to move forward when I couldn't." Jackson reached across the table, hesitating before placing his hand over hers. "I haven't moved forward," he admitted. "I've just gotten better at pretending." The night stretched on as they talked, really talked, for the first time since Lily's funeral. About their grief, their guilt, the ways they'd failed each other when they needed each other most. Dawn was breaking when they finally fell silent, emotionally exhausted but somehow lighter. The police arrived early the next morning. Sara's parents had been frantically searching for her since she'd wandered away from a family gathering during the storm. The reunion was tearful and joyous, with promises of staying in touch. As the police car pulled away with Sara safely inside, Elizabeth turned to Jackson with determination in her eyes. "I want to foster," she said simply. "There are so many children who need a safe place, even if just for a little while." Jackson stared at her, stunned by the sudden declaration. "Are you sure? After everything with Lily?" "Because of everything with Lily," Elizabeth corrected him. We have so much love to give, Jackson. And it's just sitting here, unused, while we drift apart. What followed was a journey neither of them could have anticipated. The fostering classes, the home inspections, the anxious waiting. Their first placement came 3 months later. Twins, just 4 years old, removed from an unsafe home. Then came a teenager with a chip on his shoulder and talent for mathematics that Elizabeth, a former teacher, helped nurture. Over the next 2 years, they welcomed 8 children into their home. Some stayed for days, others for months. Each left an imprint on their hearts, each taught them something about resilience and hope. The community noticed. Friends who had drifted away during their grief began to return. Elizabeth started a support group for foster families at their local community center. Jackson, who worked in construction, rallied his colleagues to renovate spaces for families in need. But the most profound change was between them. The walls they built around their individual grief began to crumble as they united in purpose. They learned to laugh again, to touch again, to see Lily's memory as a blessing rather than just a wound. On the 3rd anniversary of the night they found Sara, Elizabeth handed Jackson an envelope. Inside was a letter. They had been approved to adopt Mia, a 6-year-old who had been in their care for nearly a year, whose parents' rights had been terminated after repeated failures to create a safe home. Are you ready for this? Elizabeth asked, her eyes searching his face. To be a father again? Jackson pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. I never stopped being a father, he whispered. I just forgot how to live like one. The adoption day was bright and clear, the courtroom filled with friends and the other foster children who had passed through their home. As the judge made it official, Mia threw her arms around both of them, her face radiant with joy. That evening, as Mia slept peacefully in what was now officially her bedroom, Elizabeth and Jackson sat on their porch swing, hands intertwined. Do you ever think about Sara? Jackson asked. Where she might be now? Elizabeth smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. I got a card from her mother last Christmas. She's doing well in school. Loves science. Wants to be a doctor. Jackson nodded, a sense of peace washing over him. One lost child led us to so many others who needed us. And back to each other, Elizabeth added softly. As the stars appeared overhead, Jackson reflected on the strange and winding path that had brought them here. How close they had come to losing everything. How one small act of kindness on a rainy night had rippled outward, touching countless lives, including their own. Sometimes the most profound journeys begin with the simplest choices. To stop for a lost child, to open a door, to try again when all seems lost. In the end, it wasn't what Elizabeth did that shocked Jackson most. It was what they built together from the broken pieces of their hearts. A home large enough for their grief and their joy, their past and their future, their lost daughter and the children who needed them now. The greatest healing often comes not from moving on, but from moving toward pain, toward love, toward the people who need us most. In that movement, we sometimes find ourselves again, changed but whole, ready to embrace whatever comes next. The morning after Mia's adoption, Jackson woke before dawn. He slipped quietly from bed, careful not to wake Elizabeth, and padded down the hallway. He paused at Mia's door, pushing it open just enough to see her sleeping form, one arm flung dramatically over her head, mouth slightly open. The sight made his chest tighten with a familiar mixture of love and fear. He continued to the kitchen and started the coffee maker, then stepped onto the back porch. The air was cool, heavy with dew, the sky just beginning to lighten at the edges. This had become his ritual, these quiet moments before the house awakened, before the day's demands began. Jackson sank into the weathered Adirondack chair and closed his eyes. Sometimes, in these silent moments, he could almost feel Lily's presence, not as the sharp, stabbing grief of before, but as a gentle awareness, like sunshine on closed eyelids. Dad? Mia's voice startled him. She stood in the doorway, her dark hair tangled from sleep, clutching the stuffed elephant she'd arrived with 10 months ago. Hey, sweetheart. It's early. Couldn't sleep? She shook her head and climbed onto his lap without hesitation, something she'd only recently begun to do. I had the dream again. Jackson nodded, wrapping his arms around her small frame. The dream where she was back in her first home, hiding in the closet while voices shouted and things broke. Her therapist had said these dreams might continue for years, triggered by changes, even positive ones like the adoption. You're safe now, he murmured into her hair. You're home. Mia nodded against his chest. I know. But sometimes my brain forgets. Jackson smiled at her phrasing, straight from her therapist, but delivered with such matter-of-fact wisdom. My brain forgets things too sometimes. They sat together, watching the sun rise until Elizabeth found them there, her hair still mussed from sleep, 2 coffee mugs in her hands. Room for one more? She asked, handing Jackson a mug. Mia scooted over, making space on the wide chair. As Elizabeth settled beside them, Jackson felt a profound sense of rightness wash over him. This wasn't the life he'd planned. It was messier, more complicated, shot through with both deeper sorrows and unexpected joys. The day of Mia's adoption party arrived with perfect early autumn weather. Their backyard filled with people, foster families they'd met through the support group, colleagues, neighbors, and friends who had drifted back into their lives. Sara's family came too, the little girl now 10 years old and bubbling with excitement about being a junior bridesmaid in her cousin's wedding. As Jackson manned the grill, he watched Elizabeth moving through the crowd, her laugh carrying across the yard. She caught his eye and smiled, a private moment in the midst of chaos. He remembered how close they'd come to losing each other, how the silence between them had once seemed unbridgeable. Later, as the party wound down and the sun began to set, their social worker Denise pulled them aside. I have a situation, she began, her expression serious. Twin boys 18 months old. Their mother is in the hospital, overdose. It's not her first. The father isn't in the picture. Jackson and Elizabeth exchanged glances. They'd agreed to take a break from new placements after Mia's adoption, to give her time to settle into her permanent place in the family. It would just be for a few days, Denise continued. Until we can locate extended family. I wouldn't ask, but you're the only ones with infant experience who have space right now. Elizabeth reached for Jackson's hand. Can we have a minute? They stepped inside, away from the remaining guests. What do you think? Elizabeth asked. It's sooner than we planned. Jackson ran a hand through his hair. I think we should talk to Mia first. This affects her too now. They found Mia showing Sara her collection of rocks and feathers in the treehouse Jackson had built last summer. Mia, honey, Elizabeth began. We need to ask you something important. They explained the situation simply. 2 little boys needed a safe place to stay for a little while. How did she feel about that? Mia considered this seriously, her brow furrowed in concentration. Will they cry a lot? Babies are loud. Probably, Jackson admitted. But it would just be for a few days. Mia nodded slowly. I think we should help them. When I was scared, someone helped me. Sara, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. When I was lost, your dad helped me. That's what people are supposed to do, right? Jackson felt his throat tighten. That's right. The twins arrived that night, after the party had ended. They were identical, with wispy blonde hair and solemn blue eyes. They didn't cry as the social worker handed them over. They were too exhausted, too bewildered by the sudden changes. This is Mason and this is Miles, Denise explained, pointing to each boy in turn. Their mom might be able to take them back if she completes treatment this time. We'll know more in a few days. That night was chaos. Forgotten how to prepare bottles, forgotten the particular exhaustion of caring for infants. Mia watched it all with wide eyes, alternating between fascination and dismay at the disruption. It's just for a few days, Elizabeth reminded her as she tucked her in, the sound of Jackson singing softly to one fussing twin drifting down the hallway. But days turned into weeks. The boy's mother checked herself out of treatment against medical advice and disappeared. Extended family were located but unwilling or unable to take the children. We need to make a decision, Elizabeth said one night, after they'd finally gotten all 3 children to sleep. The boys need permanency. If we don't commit to keeping them long-term, Denise needs to find a family who will. Jackson sank onto the couch, bone-tired. Can we do this? 3 kids? The twins will need so much, therapies, assessments. There could be developmental issues from the mother's drug use. Elizabeth sat beside him, leaning her head against his shoulder. I know. It's a lot. Too much, maybe. Mia's still adjusting. She needs our attention too. They sat in silence, the weight of the decision pressing on them. Finally, Elizabeth spoke. Remember what you said to me that night you brought Sara home? When I asked if you were ready to be a father again? Jackson nodded. I said I never stopped being one. I think that's still true. We're already their parents in every way that matters. The question is just whether we're going to keep being their parents. The next morning, they called a family meeting. Mia sat cross-legged on the floor, the twins crawling around her, occasionally pulling themselves up on the coffee table before plopping back down. Mia, Jackson began carefully. We need to talk about Mason and Miles. They need a forever family, like you have with us now. Mia looked up, her dark eyes serious. Are they going to go away? Elizabeth shook her head. That depends. We're thinking they could stay with us, become part of our family permanently. But that would be a big change, and we want to know how you feel about it. Mia was quiet for a long moment, watching as Miles determinedly crawled toward a toy just out of reach. She scooted it closer to him. They're already my brothers, she said simply. They just don't know it yet. Jackson felt tears prick his eyes. He looked at Elizabeth, saw the same emotion reflected there. Are you sure, sweetheart? Elizabeth asked. It would mean sharing us, sharing your space. It would be noisy and chaotic sometimes. Mia shrugged. It's already noisy. And you always say family isn't about having enough love, it's about love that grows to fit everyone who needs it. Jackson laughed, wiping at his eyes. When did you get so wise? Ms. Denise says I'm an old soul. Mia replied seriously. The process of adopting the twins was longer and more complicated than Mia's had been. There were court dates and home studies, evaluations and paperwork. The boy's mother resurfaced briefly, then disappeared again. Their father was eventually located in another state, but signed away his rights without ever meeting them. Through it all, their little family adjusted and grew. The twins began to thrive, their initial developmental delays improving with early intervention services. Mia blossomed in her role as big sister, fiercely protective and endlessly patient. On the twins' 3rd birthday, also the day their adoption was finalized, they threw another backyard party. Sara came again, now 12 and starting to show the first signs of adolescence. Her family had become close friends over the years, a connection that had begun with a chance encounter on a rainy night. As the children played and adults chatted, Jackson found himself standing beside Sara's father, watching the chaos with matching expressions of contented exhaustion. I never properly thanked you, the man said quietly. For finding Sara that night. For keeping her safe. Jackson shook his head. No thanks needed. Anyone would have done the same. But they didn't. You did. He paused, watching as Sara helped Mia organize a game for the younger children. She still talks about it sometimes. About how scared she was, and how you made her feel safe. I think it shaped her, that experience. Later, as the party wound down and the sun began to set, Jackson found Elizabeth sitting on the porch steps, watching as Mia chased the twins around the yard, their laughter carrying on the evening air. Penny for your thoughts, he said, sitting beside her. Elizabeth smiled, leaning against him. I was just thinking about how life surprises you. How the worst thing that ever happened to us somehow led us here. Jackson nodded, understanding completely. The loss of Lily would always be with them, a quiet ache that never fully disappeared. But alongside that grief had grown this new life, this family pieced together from broken parts and made whole again. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't stopped that night? Elizabeth asked. If you hadn't found Sara? Jackson watched as Miles tumbled onto the grass, his face scrunching up in preparation for tears until Mia swooped in, distracting him with a silly dance that soon had him giggling instead. "I try not to think about the paths not taken," he said finally. "But I'm grateful every day for the one we're on." As darkness fell, they called the children in for bedtime. The routine was chaotic but familiar. Baths and teeth brushing, stories and songs, the twins insisting on one more hug, one more drink of water, one more reassurance that tomorrow would come and they would still be here, still be family. Finally, with all three children asleep, Jackson and Elizabeth collapsed onto the couch, the house quiet at last. "We did it," Elizabeth murmured, her eyes already drifting closed. "Another day." Jackson smiled, pulling her closer. "Another good day." Outside, the stars emerged one by one, bearing witness to the small miracle that had unfolded in this ordinary house, on this ordinary street. The miracle of hearts broken open wide enough to let love flow in again, to let healing begin, to create family from the fragments of what was lost and what was found. And somewhere in that starlit sky, Jackson liked to think, Lily was watching too, her spirit present in every act of kindness, every moment of courage, every choice to love despite the risk of loss. Her brief life had taught them the most profound lesson of all, that love, once given, is never truly gone. It simply finds new ways to express itself, new hearts to inhabit, new lives to transform. In the end, that was the real story, not just what Elizabeth did next, but what they all did together. They chose love, again and again, even when it hurt, even when it scared them, even when the future was uncertain. And in that choosing, they found their way home.